Hello, everybody. You're listening to the Franchise Manual podcast, brought to you by FranMan, Franchise Manuals, LLC, at www.franman.net, the home of the online manual by FranMan. The Franchise Manual is a behind-the-scenes look at all things franchise and the people that make it look easy. Now, in this podcast series, we want to address topics that are specific to franchising with the members of the franchise community who are qualified to address those topics. This could be anything from social media to financing, operations, sales, you name it. If there's a topic that you want covered, shoot me an email at kit.vincent@franman.net and I'll see if I can get it lined up for you. Operating a franchise is not the same as running a small business. So if you're thinking about franchising your business, then you really need to listen to the Franchise Manual podcast. This is episode number 2, and my partner today is Bob Gappa. Now, why should you listen to what Bob Gappa has to say? Well, he's the founder and CEO of Management 2000, a franchise consulting company established in 1981. Now, that's 34 years ago. During that time, he's helped over 1,200 companies. That's one hefty client list. Management 2000 maintains an office here in the United States as well as an office in the Middle East. In just a bit, you're going to hear Bob speak, and you'll quickly understand why he's considered to be one of the world's most respected global authorities on growth strategies and franchising. I'm honored to count Bob as one of my very good friends. Today, Bob and I will be discussing a paper that he wrote some time ago called Understanding Franchising. If you manage a mature franchise system, then you will definitely identify with the topics on this paper. If you work with the startup franchise system, then you still have time to implement some of the strategies that we'll discuss today. If you're thinking about franchising, then you've listened to the podcast just in time. Now, you can get a copy of the document directly from the team at Management 2000 simply by sending an email to m2000@mgmt2000.com. That's m2000@mgmt2000.com. Or you can call 800-847-5763 and ask for a copy. However, you don't need that document in front of you while you listen to this podcast. So how about I stop talking and let's hear Bob, this week's partner on the Franchise Manual podcast. The Franchise Manual podcast, brought to you by FranMan.
1, 2, 3.
The Franchise Manual is a behind-the-scenes look at all things franchise and the people that make it look easy.
Yeah, but we're going to make it fun, right?
Shut up. Okay, fine. We'll just start the podcast.
Hello again. I am Kit Vincent, and welcome again to the Franchise Manual podcast. Today, we are joined by Bob Gappa. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you very much, Kit.
Yeah, I'm glad you made it. I've been looking forward to this podcast for a long time. Bob, I eventually want to talk to you about a piece that you wrote a while back. It's called Understanding Franchising, and how important that content is to new as well as existing franchisors. But first, I want everybody listening to kind of get to know you, not just your name and what you've done, but to really get to know you. You know, I have a theory that people buy from people, not from companies. So, for any of those listeners who don't know who you are, I want to spend some time getting to know the real Bob Gappa. Are you up for a few get to know Bob questions?
Sounds scary, Kit.
I know, could be. It could be fun though too. It's all about perspective. How far do we go back? When did do you remember that?
Oh, you and I?
Yeah.
Actually, I don't remember our first date, so refresh my mind.
Oh, yeah. See, you had on that little polka dotted dress, and I was, no, wait, that was somebody else. I think it must have been less than 10 years ago, because that's when we created FranMan a little over 10 years ago, and it wasn't too long after that where you came around and said, hey, we're looking to join with somebody like that. And we kind of sniffed each other for about a year before you allowed me to work with you on a few clients. And I got to tell you, that helped the company a great deal, because you gave a lot of credibility to FranMan in the days when we didn't have very much, and I've always appreciated that, and I've always looked up to you as a mentor, and that's why I've been looking forward to this so much.
Well, thank you.
Where is Bob Gappa from originally? Where do you hail from?
Born in Montana and stayed there until I left to go to college in Minnesota. Then I taught in a college in Florida for 4 years.
All right, well, let's hold on just a second. You're getting a little bit ahead there. So, born in Montana, and you didn't leave Montana until you were 18?
Yeah, right.
So, what city in Montana was that? I'm always joking about Butte. What city was that?
Well, born in the southeast corner in a little town called Baker, and the only paved road was the highway that went through. Then moved to a much larger town called Harlowton. Mm-hmm. And they had a railroad, so the basketball team was the Harlowton Engineers. Then my father hurt his back in a snowstorm and couldn't do what he was doing, which was running lumberyards. So he took a desk job, and we moved to the metropolis of Billings, Montana, which is one of the two largest cities in Montana, neither of which has more than 110,000 people.
Okay, so Billings, Montana is where you ended up, was where your dad ended up after he hurt his back. Now, tell me about growing up.
Well, my mother, who died last year at 102 years of age, was a college graduate. Pretty unusual in those days. And my father, which was more normal, had a fourth grade education. And they were both German Catholics. And so I was raised in a German Catholic family. And enough said if you know about German Catholic families. Very much, the Catholic religion was very much a part of my life. And when I was very small, I had two people I admired. My uncle, who was the chief financial officer of a diocese, a Catholic diocese, and he was a priest and a Monsignor, and Gene Autry. And so I wanted to be a cowboy and I wanted to be a priest, so I decided that I was going to be a cowboy priest. And
nice.
And from about the age of 5, I have a picture of myself with 2 matching pearl-handled guns and a Roman collar.
I think that's beautiful. That needs to be on a website somewhere.
So I was going to stop secular criminals and save the soul.
Why has this never come up in conversation before? This is too good.
Some things you just have to wait till you get to know someone.
Oh, that's good stuff. So I'm assuming from your conversation that there are no brothers and sisters. Is that right?
A sister who is 3 years older than I am, yes. Uh-huh. And she, is, as a matter of fact, became a Catholic nun. So
nice.
Very.
So it's deep in the family then. Who was your best friend growing up?
My best friend was a fellow named Mike Comiskey, and Mike is a really neat guy. I still hang out with Mike, and he was adopted, which was unusual in those days. And his parents were very cool, but yeah, Mike Comiskey was.
Well, I want to know. My follow-up question to that is, what's the worst trouble you ever got in together?
Oh, well, we got into a lot of trouble together, but probably the worst trouble we ever got into was when we used to go from Billings, Montana in July to the Calgary Stampede, and Mike had a Volkswagen convertible, and we'd put beer in a cooler in the back, even though we weren't of age, and we also put pylons in the back so that when we wanted a parking place in a busy area, we could just put the pylons out. And we got caught doing that. But my worst experience as a kid, not counting Mike, was when I got picked up for stealing a record from a record store when I was like 9. and the record store owner called the police, and they took me down the police station and booked me and showed me the jail, and then did the worst thing possible they could do, which was in my presence to call my father and say that they were releasing me. And my dad said, just start walking home on First Street and I'll pick you up.
Ouch.
Put an end to my career as a thief.
Right. Because you had a bad resume so far.
Well, the interesting thing about this is my father, remember having a fourth grade education, he didn't understand branding, but he did understand branding because one of the things he said to me as he loosened his belt was that I had damaged the family name. Now, if he had had my mother's education, he would have said I damaged his brand.
The family brand with a capital B. The brand. I thought you said he was going to brand you.
Well, in that case, the capital B stood for butt.
That's right. Because you damaged the family brand. Now I'm going to damage your brand.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way it was back then, and parents thought they were doing the best they could, and I certainly got plenty of that when I was growing up too.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So, Gene Autry was your mentor or your hero growing up, and you say your uncle was more of your mentor?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And when I was about 12, I went to a rodeo in Big Timber, Montana, which had about 15,000 people, and Gene Autry was the star, and he came out with Champ, of course, and he had Little Champ with him, which was, of course, the offspring of Champ, and I, against my father's desires, I ran down the bleachers so that I could be there when Gene Autry rode out on Champ, and when he rode out, he was absolutely so drunk they had to hold him up. Had to hold him up in his saddle, and that's when sort of his image was tarnished. Oh. So then I decided just to go to my default hero, which was my uncle. And so then I decided I'd be a priest.
Good Lord. That was horrible. Did you just cry all the way home?
Yeah, I was devastated.
That's a shame. I'm sorry to hear about that, but that's a great story.
Yeah. And then when he bought the Los Angeles baseball team, I never did like him after that.
Well, that's another interesting topic about branding. He tarnished his brand.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so Management 2000 has been around for how many years? Management 2000, for everyone who doesn't know, who wasn't listening earlier, Bob, give us a quick rundown of Management 2000.
Been in business 34 years. When I was working for a consulting company called Batten, Hudson, and Schwab, I was in charge of putting together themes and consulting products and services for clients and new ones. And in 1980-81, I came up with the idea that we should start preparing our clients for the year 2000. So I came up with a series of programs called How to Manage in the Year 2000 and Beyond. And for various reasons, I left that company and was able to take that name with me along with a couple of clients. And we ended up in Houston, Texas with the name Management 2000 because it was, I thought, forward-thinking. And I thought, too, I'll be so rich and wealthy by the year 2000, I won't need that name anymore.
Right.
And of course that did happen.
Right.
But I decided to keep working. So.
Well, I remember when the year 2000 came around, and you guys were considering changing that, and the indecision was no. So you're going to keep it because that's your brand. Yeah.
And in those days, I wasn't as collaborative as I am. If I was more collaborative, we might have changed the name.
Yeah, that's right. I wasn't there in 2000, but I remember you talking about it.
Yeah.
If you were to give me a ballpark figure about how many franchisors do you include on your client list? This is a pretty impressive number, I think.
It is. It had just recently surpassed 1,250.
1,250. That is a pretty impressive number. We can throw out some of the more recognizable names on that list.
Well, the one, there are some that we've worked with longer than others, and Great Clips is one where they have now 3,300 locations, and we started working with them when they had slightly over 200, and they were stuck.
Oh my gosh!
They were stuck, and we've done work with them throughout the years, and they're really a very good company. We've worked with all the real estate brands that you could think of. We've worked with Chili's as a long-term client. It's just one of those things, kid. You know me, I don't like to do
the
name thing.
I know. It's not about that. It's about building. It's about building credibility with the listener. But I think you've done a great job so far. So lately, you've been spending a lot of time in Dubai. What's going on there?
2 years ago, we made a decision to establish an office in Dubai because the gentleman who is our managing partner there had been chasing us for over a year to create a joint venture partnership with him, and we kept saying no. And then I was working with a client in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and our managing partner, whose name is Hussein Murad, was going to Mecca, which is just an hour outside of Jeddah, and he said during Ramadan, and he asked me if we could meet for 15 minutes. And particularly in the Middle East, you never turn down a request for a meeting. It just isn't done. Mm-hmm. And so I gave him 15 minutes, and it ended up being 4 hours and a handshake. We found we had a lot in common, and we established that we had the same vision. And so now we have an office there, and it's doing very well, and we have clients in Saudi Arabia and Egypt and India and the UAE and the GCC. And I've spent the last couple of years, the majority of my time, helping our consultants there learn Management 2000's philosophy and process and behaviors as we service our clients.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Now, I believe that routines or rituals play a significant role in the success or the failure of an individual. Now, you've been relevant as a high-performance franchise consultant for over 30 years. Clearly, you're considered to be a success. What's a typical day in the life of Bob Gappa? And what I mean is, what kind of routines or rituals do you follow that you believe have helped you stay on top of your industry?
Well, the day always starts with a 1 hour walk, which is a little over 3 miles. And I listen to the radio, and after that, I get in my office, which is now about 6:30 or 7 in the morning. And I spend a lot of time reading and talking with clients on the phone and visiting with our team members on how they're going in executing the strategies that we have decided need to be implemented in order to achieve our growth objectives. And usually in the afternoon around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, I take another 1 hour walk for a lot of reasons, for health and for getting the cobwebs out of my head. And then I come back and have a glass of wine or two while I finish up in my home office, and usually watch a little television from 9 to 11 and go to bed, and it starts all over.
Would you say that your walks in the morning and in the evening are more of a meditation where you're focusing and deep problem solving type behavior?
I think that that helped because I listen to National Public Radio, and that helps me get in touch with what's going on in the world and in the United States. And oftentimes it triggers ideas that can be helpful to our clients or to our planning what Management 2000 might do in the future.
Interesting. One of this is off topic, but one of the conversations that I remember most and have referred back to the most in my life after meeting you was after the 2008-2009 financial meltdown. Mm-hmm. I called you up and just misery loves company, so we hadn't had a phone call or any business in a while, and I was talking to you, and you said, Kit, what's going to separate the people who succeed or who survive this financial crisis and those who fail, who die during this crisis, is just one thing. Those who succeed are going to use the time, all their free time that they have. They're going to use their free time. They're going to pull out a piece of paper, and they are going to redefine their company. And those are going to be the ones who come out of this recession stronger than they did when they got into it. And I took your advice, and we did that. We came up with the online manual by FranMan, and that sounds like a lot about what you just. It kind of relates to what you just said about listening to NPR and finding out how you're going to change your company, or how your company will evolve as the times change.
It's that's a good observation, because I think you're either a front windshield person or a rear view mirror person. And the rear view mirror is nice to glance at, but you got to spend time looking out the windshield at the way things are, not the way you wish they were.
Right.
And so if there's a meltdown, you have to deal with that, or you just will be catatonic.
Yep,
And,
I agree.
We've been through 4 recessions, and we're still here. So there you go.
There you go. That is, you can attribute that to your planning. Peter Drucker. I remember. I remember one time I referred to him as Pete in your presence, and one would have thought I took the Lord's name in vain.
Well, you did. Yeah.
Tell me your thoughts on Peter Drucker.
Peter Drucker has been referred to by many people as the father of modern management. And in Peter Drucker's day, there were no universities anywhere in the world that offered a degree in business of any sort. Kind of hard to believe, but it's true. And in Peter Drucker's day in the United States, there were only a couple of universities that offered undergraduate degrees in business.
Right.
Because everybody ran their business according to the military model. Ready, aim, fire. Or I'm not ready and I don't know what I'm aiming at, but I still need to fire.
Right.
And Drucker wrote a book called The Principles of Management, and then wrote a lot of other books. And his first job in the United States as a consultant was to reorganize General Motors for a gentleman whose last name is Sloan and one named Kettering, now having cancer institutes named after them. But he reorganized General Motors and then went on to do a lot. But Drucker wrote a book that to me is probably one of his most important works, and it's called Managing for Results, where he makes the distinction between the reason, the purpose, and the result of business. And he says the reason for the existence of business is economic performance, not making money, economic performance. And the way you achieve economic performance is for the purpose and the result of business. And the purpose of business, he says, is to create a customer. And the result of a business is a very satisfied customer. Now, today, Drucker would say that the result of a business is a very satisfied and loyal, frequent user, promoter customer. Mm-hmm. But in his day, he was doing breakthrough thinking. And he would also say that if the purpose of a business is to create a customer and the result is a very satisfied customer, then you have to answer 3 other questions, which he said you always have to answer, and that is, who is our customer? Segmentation today would be what you'd use to figure that out. What do our customers value? What are they buying in distinction from what are we selling? And how do we enhance what they value? And that's the way, when you answer that question, that's the way you structure the operating system and the training program for your team members. So those three questions are critical. And some people, and Drucker included, will cast question 4 and 5 in this way. Once you say, who are our customers and what do they value and how do we enhance what they value, the fourth question would be, what is your plan to enhance what they value? And fifthly, how do you measure and know that you have done a good job at that? And that leads us. He wrote that book maybe 35 years ago, and now today we are able to do that. The answer to that fifth question with things like the Net Promoter Score and some other ways that we measure things. And we here at Management 2000 have technology called Experientrics, which measures a great place to work, to what degree a company has a great place to work, and to what degree customers will recommend you using the Net Promoter Score, and also to what degree are franchisees pleased that they became your strategic partner.
Right.
So that is Mr. Drucker.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And at the end of this podcast, I'll give you an opportunity to tell people how they can contact you so that they can discuss with you some of the deeper topics about that Peter Drucker brought up in his book. Because I've read his book at your recommendation, and it's a fantastic read. It's one of my reference books on my library as well.
Yeah, I always think, I've always read it once a year, and I keep finding things in it that weren't there the year before when I read.
I was talking to Jerry Darnell just the other day, and he said that there's a book that he reads once a year religiously as well. So now we know a lot more about the person Bob Gappa than we ever knew before. I think that we've established pretty easily that you're a highly qualified franchise resource. So let's explore the content of a piece that you wrote several years ago called Understanding Franchising. And for everybody listening, you can get a copy of this document directly from Management 2000 simply by sending an email to M2000, that's the number 2000, M2000 at MGMT2000, the number 2000.com. M2000 at MGMT2000.com. You don't need that document while you're listening to this. We're going to discuss that document in detail. But if you do want a copy of it, just shoot them an email, or you can call them at 800-847-5763 and ask for a copy. I'll include all that contact information in the show notes so you can get that there as well. I got to tell you, Bob, this is one of my favorite pieces because it does such a fine job of defining the nature of the relationship between the franchisee and the franchisor. Mm-hmm. How would you describe the document?
Well, what we always try to do is present a concept so that people can understand it as a human being, not just academically or theoretically or intellectually. And what we make an effort to do in this article is present franchising as a relationship between and among human beings, including the human beings at the franchisor level, the human beings at the franchisee level, and the human beings at the customer level, and how they are all interacting to achieve common goals and objectives. Mm-hmm. And franchising began in the United States with entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs get in the way of their own success at a certain point in time because when a franchise reaches a certain level of numbers, it requires more systemization at the franchisor level, and that requires professional management, and entrepreneurs are, let me put it this way, entrepreneurs by and large don't like professional management because they perceive it as restricting and constricting their behaviors. And so at some point, the entrepreneur has to get out of their way, get out of their way.
Right. Get out of their own way.
But for instance, franchising, and Kit, I'll ask you this question. Do you do anything with your family around celebrations of birthdays or holidays, Christmas, New Year's, 4th of July? Do you do anything that your family did when you were growing up, or that your grandfather on either side did? Are there any traditions?
Sure, there are traditions that you carry on. Things like fresh squeezed orange juice at Christmas time, or maybe some families do an opening of one present on the morning of the birthday, but then they can open the rest of them in the evening. Little things like that people pass on from family to family.
And that means that you are a franchise of your family.
Okay.
Because you're replicating what somebody else did that they found successful. And we often hear of movies as being franchises. We hear of the Star Wars franchise, for instance.
Football teams and.
Mm-hmm. But like a movie franchise doesn't have franchisees, but the word franchise means there's a replicable theme and replicable characters and replicable functions. And,
Interesting.
And so in general, a franchise is something that is replicable. Now, when we look at franchising as a business structure, and everyone knows that religions have a business aspect to them, and they have a religious aspect to them. And the Catholic Church, from the beginning, was and still is an example of area development, because until the Middle Ages, the function of the Pope and the function of the bishop was secular, and they were not required to be, and very seldom were, ordained priests. And their job was to grow the brand. And so in the Middle Ages, you had the Holy Roman Catholic Church, which the size of the Catholic diocese was the same as the Roman Empire was in that area. And oftentimes the ruler of the Roman Empire was the bishop.
Right.
And so when one says, how successful is area development in a franchise, I'd say, well, it's been around for 2,000 years. And so the parishes are really franchise locations, and they do the same things in each of those parishes that everyone else does, regardless of the country you're in. And so when we move into franchising, as we know it now in the United States, people often say that the Singer sewing machine is the beginning of franchising in the United States, but it really isn't. And in our government, our 50 states are really franchises of the United States, and the counties are really franchises of the states. And so they each have constitutions and they have Bill of Rights, and those constitutions and the Bill of Rights are really the philosophical underpinnings, if you will, the missions, the core values of the way they operate. And the operating system is really the judicial and the legislative branches of the government are what we call in business franchising the franchisor and the franchisee's operating system. And so franchising is very normal in our lives. We just don't look at it that way.
That's fascinating, and you just brought up so many topics that we could have an entire podcast, an hour-long podcast discussion on. Very fascinating. Let's get back to the document.
Okay.
And talk about, in the document you write about unified thinking. And what is that? What is unified thinking, and why is it important to a new franchisor?
Well, unified thinking is very much like what goes on right now in preparation for the presidential election of 2016. By and large, there's a core set of thinking in the Democrat Party, and there's a core way of thinking in the Republican Party that over the last decade or so has been pretty clearly differentiated. And what's important in those two parties, particularly in when they get inside the Senate and the House, is that the members of each of those parties are united in the way they think about an issue. And so there is a difference between having different opinions and having differences of opinion. And when you have unified thinking, you can have differences of opinion, but there very often isn't different ways to different opinions, because then you call that person a dissident. And what franchising does and what unified thinking does, it establishes the principles and the foundations and the values upon which opinions are formed. And when you have unified thinking, you can have more focus and you can get more done. At certain times, new things happen that make us all question the fundamental principles and foundations upon which we think. And when that happens, a group of people might change one of the fundamental principles. But the point here is that people salute, if you will, the fundamental principles, and then they form the way they think about issues around that, and that creates unified thinking, and that's the way you get things done.
And so how does that apply to a new startup franchisor? How's that concept, how does he wrap his hands around that and say, how do I use that in my life?
Well, what they would have to do is ask themselves, for instance, do they have a core mission that describes the purpose of their brand? Mm-hmm. Do they have a BHAG, a vision, if you will, on what they want to accomplish by a certain point in time, say 300 locations by 2025? And do they have a set of core values upon which they make decisions and can have discussions with people who don't behave certain ways that include sentences like this? Help me understand what beliefs you have that made you act that way. Because what we can do then is either point out where their behaviors are not based on the foundations of the franchise, either the mission or the core values or the achievement of the vision. And without those fundamental foundations, mission, core values, and vision, communicated to and signed off on by the first and second and third and following franchisees, you will get all kinds of not only differences of opinion, but different opinions, and you'll have chaos early on in your franchise system, and it will either implode or stagnate.
Mm-hmm. All right. Interesting. And in the document you write, the purpose of franchising and the purpose of a business and the purpose of a franchise company ultimately are the same. Can you explain that and explain why that's important for a new franchisor to fully understand that concept?
Yes.
You touched on it a little bit earlier, but let's see if we can go into a little more depth into it.
But in the 20th century, franchising was looked on as, quote, giving opportunities to individual people and entities to achieve financial goals or even financial freedom. In the 21st century, franchising is seen as a way to build a brand. And all you can say is, wow, that is so very, very different.
Right.
Because in the 20th century, the focus was on the franchisee. And there are some franchisors who actually believe that their franchisees are their customers. And then the customers of the franchisee are their customers, meaning the franchisee's customers. And in the 21st century, we look on customers, the end user customer as the customer of the brand, not the customer of either the franchisor and the franchisee, because the franchisor and the franchisee in the 21st century are seen as a single entity, not like they were in the 20th century as two separate entities who seldom get along.
Right.
The purpose of a business is to create, retain, and build frequency among existing customers and to create an experience for the existing customers that result in the existing customers recommending that particular brand to their friends, family, and sphere of influence. And that emphasis is very different in the 21st century than in the 20th century, where the goal was to make money and profit. And so you constantly, in the 20th century, had financial goals, and you believed that the way to make money was to control labor and control food cost or any other kind of costs if you weren't in the food business, and to sell more. And so you paid the least you could for the products that made up your service and your product, and you kept labor as low as you could, and so gross profit increased. In the 21st century, what we know is that what's most important is to, as Drucker said, to create a customer, then retain them, then build frequency, and that if you do that, if you can build frequency and a strong customer base, your revenues will increase while your fixed costs don't go up because they're fixed, and your variable costs don't increase all that much. And so that's the way you truly make more money. And so the purpose then of a franchise company is to build unified thinking between and among the team members at the franchisor and franchisee level, that the single most important role of each and every member of both those entities, the franchisor and the franchisee, is to create an experience for the customer that makes them want to come back and recommend the brand to their friends and family.
To win customers for life is what you say in the document.
To win customers for life. Absolutely.
Beautifully written. At FranMan, we're contracted to write custom franchise operations manuals for our clients, and normally at the beginning, at the initial meeting, I'll spend some time with the client making sure that they understand how a well-written operations manual will help them protect their brand. You know, brand's an important element of franchising. And in your paper, you write about the function of a brand. Can you talk about that some?
Well, the function of the brand, the function of the operating system, the manuals that you write, Kip, because the brand comes to life when the operating system is fully, completely, and consistently implemented each and every time with each and every guest by each and every team member. And what we do in the 20th century, again, versus the 21st, in the 20th century, as you know, operations manuals were descriptions of how to create a product or how to execute a service. In the 21st century, they do that, how to execute a service, how to create a product. But in addition, the operating system describes how to interact with the guest, the customer, so that the customer has feelings that are positive, and those feelings translate into a willingness to spend money at the brand. And so we call the feelings that are created in the customer to make them loyal and frequent promoters of the brand as emotional currency, 2 words.
Right.
So the job of the operating system is to instruct the executors of the operating system on how to create it with such consistency and correctness that the consumer has emotional currency as a result. And the consumer then gives us, the franchisee and the franchisor, financial currency. But
how do they spend that emotional currency? Where does that go?
Well, what it does is it makes them want to come back again, so that they can get more of that emotional currency.
Got it.
And if we take a non-franchised brand, where I personally get a lot of emotional currency, it's Amazon and Zappos. And in terms of airlines, it would be Emirates airline or Qatar airline, where I get negative emotions, which I won't name an airline because you can almost pick any one of them. But for instance, we talk about mission statements, winning the customer for life. There's an airline that will go unnamed by me, for whom I believe the mission statement is this: we as an airline, we are not happy until you're not happy.
I was just about to quote you on that one.
And gratitude for customers is rarely expressed. That's the function of the operating system, is to create an experience for the guest that results in the guest having more emotional currency in their mind, which is a subjective perception, than the financial currency that they spent with us, which is not subjective.
So it's to help the franchisees duplicate a positive experience in the mind of the customer. And
even more, and actually add mind, which is intellectual, and heart, which is emotional. Got it.
When I read the piece on the function of an operating system, I almost wanted to stand up and say, "Amen, brother," because it's so near and dear to my heart, because that's what we do for a living. Okay, so I love this little saying that reads, "Be careful what you think, for your thoughts become your words. Be careful what you say, for your words become your actions. And be careful what you do, for your actions become your habits."
Yep.
Now, I can always tell when I'm writing a manual for a Management 2000 client, almost immediately. If they've drunk the Gappa flavored Kool-Aid, then I will hear grant instead of sell right off the bat.
Yeah.
So let's talk about who owns what and how using the wrong words can have an effect on the operating system, the brand, and ultimately the field support as well.
Well, language in franchising is demonstrated proof that if you say something long enough, even if it's not true, people believe it. None of us would say that we own our driver's license.
Right.
There's not a lawyer that would say they own their license to practice law. No doctor would say they own their medical license. No dentist would say they own their dentist license.
Right.
No realtor would say they own their real estate license. No one would say that they own anything that has the word license in it, except in franchising.
What happened? Where did that come from?
And in franchising, the entrepreneurs started because entrepreneurs are salesmen. And if they're not selling something, they're not happy.
Right.
And so they took this agreement that the lawyers gave them and they put it on the copy machine and they pushed print. And it made 5 copies, and they took them and they went off and sold them to 5 people. And they said, now you have a franchise. And now you have people, for instance, who are...
They say you bought a franchise. They didn't say you have a franchise. They say you just bought a franchise.
Just bought a franchise. So, you know, and it's so weird the way we think about franchising. It's not like the way we think about anything else. I'll give you an example. So if I have 5 franchises and you come to town and I say, let me come and show you my franchises. And so I drive you by each one and I say, there is my franchise. Okay. Now, if we drove past the Oval Office in Washington and we'd never say, there's the president's. If we drove past the building where the Supreme Court is, we'd never say, there's the Supreme Court. If we drove by a church, we'd never say, there's the church, there's my church. There's the building where the church functions most of the time. There's the building where the Supreme Court functions.
Right.
There's the office where the president functions. But we all know that when he's in Air Force One, that's the office.
Right.
But we all know that people make up the church. Judges make up the Supreme Court. A person makes up the president. People make up the Senate and the House. But when we get to a franchise, somehow it's a building.
Okay.
And so what we have not done a good job of is saying that a franchise, like a church, a family, you'd never say that your marriage was the house you live in.
Right.
You know, and so what we have to do is realize that franchising is a relationship between and among people based on philosophy and beliefs, based on behaviors that are correct and incorrect, based on processes that we want people to follow, and the use of technology that makes all of it easier. Mm-hmm. And when you combine those 4 things, beliefs in action, which are behaviors, 1 and 2, and processes and technology, you have the mechanics of a business, process and technology, and the dynamics of the business, which is beliefs in action, which is behaviors. And those things, if you want to use Harvard and Stanford and Wharton School of Economics speak, you'd say that the mechanics, process and technology is Six Sigma, or ISO 9000, or the Malcolm Baldrige Award, or Total Quality Management, and philosophy, beliefs in action, behaviors is Human Sigma. And so that's where we are today in the 21st century. Franchising is a combination of beliefs in action, behaviors, manifest in the processes and the technology that are used to create the guest experience.
Right.
And so when you mess it up and say to somebody, okay, here, buy a franchise. And I say, okay, now I own it. And in my mind, what I own, I can do whatever I want with.
Right.
And if I do whatever I want with it, then you come and say to me as the franchisor, now you're in default. And I say to you, well, how can you put me in default? Because I bought this and I own it, and so I can do anything I want with it, but now you're telling me I can't do what I want with it. And so this is what I call franchise schizophrenia, where beliefs and behaviors are in conflict. I tell you that you own it, but you can't do what you want with it, and so that's not ownership. And then when you go to sell it, I say to you, because every franchise agreement has this in it, that I, the franchisor, if you want to find a buyer for your franchise, after you do a term sheet, you have to show it to me, the franchisor, and if I want to, I, the franchisor, can simply execute that. And if I decide not to, then I get to subject the franchise candidate that you found with whom you have a term sheet. I get to subject that person to our qualification process.
Right.
So everything has to do with the beliefs that the franchisor gives the franchisee. And for instance, again, if I bought a Lexus automobile, I could, because they don't have a truck, I could turn it into a truck and Lexus couldn't do anything about it. If I leased it, I couldn't do that.
Right.
If I rented it, I couldn't do it. But in franchising, we have this strange thing, but it's getting better, where people give the franchisee the concept that they own the franchise, when in fact, the best metaphor that I know of, Kit, for this is a laptop computer where I paid cash money for the laptop, and then if it's not Apple, I pay Microsoft a certain amount of money for the software. But funniest thing, that money I paid them doesn't make me an owner of it.
Right.
I have to hit agree. And so I own the computer but not the software. And when I check into a hotel that's franchised, at the check-in counter on the left or right, there'll be a plaque that says, this hotel is owned by, and it will state the owner of the physical assets of the hotel. Let's say it's me. Mm-hmm. This hotel is owned by Bob Gappa, and then it will say who operates under a franchise agreement with Marriott Corporation of Bethesda, Maryland. And if there's a management company in between, it'll say this hotel is owned by Bob Gappa and is managed by XYZ Management Company, who operates under a franchise agreement with Marriott Corporation of Bethesda, Maryland.
So what they're doing is they're clearly defining.
They're clearly defining the relationship. And what we do in franchising is we use bits and pieces of phrases. And so oftentimes you'll see a phrase on a business card or a business, independently owned and operated. And most franchisees are not English majors, and so they don't know that independently doesn't modify operated. And so the correct phrase is, only this is a shortened version, the correct lengthy phrase is, this business is independently owned, which every franchise needs to be. It needs to be incorporated without the use of the franchisor's name, so it's an independent business. And it does business as the franchisor. And so it's independently owned and operated as a franchisee of. And so that shortened phrase oftentimes reinforces the incorrect perception that it's independently owned and independently operated.
Right.
But it's independently owned and
but not
operated
independently operated.
Yeah. And the effect on people is, it's my franchise. A franchisee thinks if they own something and the entity that services what they own is a vendor.
Right.
So the devastating effect on the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee, if franchises are sold and bought and owned, is that the franchisee believes that the franchisor, because they support them after the sale, is a vendor to them, and that the franchise royalty fee is for the support provided to them by the franchisor, none of which is correct.
Right, that was going to be my next question. One of my next questions was understanding what the fees are. But let's get back into that in a little more detail in just a second. I like the 3 bullets you have in this document that says if you sell something, that means that you bought it. If you bought it, you own it, and if you own it, then you can do what you want to with it. Right?
Yes.
Wrong. And then you describe what effect that has on the operating system and the brand and on field support, like you just described. Partners in strategy or strategic partner. If a client uses this phrase, that's just another dead giveaway that they've at one time worked with Bob Gappa. They are a Gappa disciple. What does that phrase mean?
We've had a lot of fun with this phrase over the years because the word partner legally oftentimes has fiduciary implications. And the last thing that a lawyer wants to do, appropriately so, is to create risk for their client, the franchisor. And so they shy away from the term partner in terms of describing the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee. But when we were involved with GMAC, when they were wanting to get into the real estate business, and they bought Better Homes and Garden Realty and converted it to GMAC Realty, we were involved in that, and the CEO at the time wanted to refer to the franchisees with a term that reflected the functionality of the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee, not the legal. So they didn't want to use the term franchisee because it's much like calling your child a tax deduction. And so the term strategic partner, hyphenated, it's very important that it's hyphenated, because if it's not, then strategic is a modifier of the noun partner. But if you hyphenate it, strategic partner itself becomes a noun. And the lawyers inside General Motors and outside, there were about 50 of them, talked for many, many months about this. And finally, they came up with a very simple paragraph that I'd be delighted to share with anybody that was in the FDD and franchise agreement that described that the term strategic partner referenced they were partners in the strategy to build a brand and to create and retain customers for life and loyalty for life among their customers. And thereafter, that paragraph in the very beginning of the franchise agreement and the FDD, thereafter, instead of the term franchisee in those agreements, the term strategic partner was used.
It's impressive. I like the use of it. I like what it means as well.
Yeah.
In the document you write, and let's get back to these fees again, because you touched on it a little bit earlier. But in the document you write about understanding the fees.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the initial franchise fee mostly, and a royalty fee, and sometimes a marketing fee. What kind of long-term effect can that have on a system if they're misunderstood?
Devastating, both short-term and long-term. Everybody wants to know, what do I get for that? Right. Whatever the money is that we're spending. What do I get for that? What do I get for that? What do I get for that? And if you misunderstand what you get for the initial franchise fee and the royalty, it can be devastating. So let me talk about it for a minute. Again, I'll say 20th century. The initial fee was perceived as buying the franchise. And so the franchisee was left to understand what was meant by that. In other words, what did I buy for my fee? And so it was very simple. They thought they bought the brand and the operating system because in their mind, the royalty fee was for the support. So these three legs of the stool of franchising, the brand, the operating system, and ongoing support, was simply and easily incorrectly described as buying the use of the brand and the use of the operating system. Now, in fact, what the initial fee is for is the initial fee is the way the franchisor recoups the expenses the franchisor, incur when putting franchisees into their business, including things like legal costs, overhead, salaries, the cost of any software and website design, the production by attorneys of all of the legal documents, the money spent with consultants, like money spent with Management 2000, the design and execution of the recruit system to find and qualify and grant franchises, the new franchisee training program, site selection, build out, any kind of architectural drawings, visits to see how the build out's going, grand opening, etc. All of these costs are documented, and then we always recommend a 15 to 20% fudge factor, and then you divide that number, which is spread over, say, 3 years, by the number of franchises you expect to grant, and that becomes your initial franchise fee. And if you don't hit the number you wanted to hit, it's going to cost you money. If you exceed the number of franchises you were going to grant in the formula to determine the initial fee, then you'll have a profit. But at least in honesty, you can say to a franchise candidate, what is that for? And you can say, what it does is it helps us recoup the costs that we incur in putting you in our business.
Okay. What about the royalty?
The royalty is when people say, what do I get for my royalty? The true answer is you don't get anything that you haven't already received, because the royalty is the franchisor's share of the customer's money. And the logic in that is this. When you sign a franchise agreement, what you get to do is use the brand and the operating system and the various resources the franchisor has that help you improve your performance. Mm-hmm. And those three things are one package. The use of the brand standards manual, and the marketing pieces, the operating system, and the ongoing performance improvement resources. Those three things should be one bucket, not three.
Right.
And you get access to those three things when you sign a franchise agreement. And when you use those three things in that one bucket to create and retain very satisfied and loyal frequent user promoter guests, it is logical that the entity that gave you permission and a license agreement to use those things for the purpose of generating revenue, that they should get a share of that revenue because you're using their stuff.
Right.
And so the royalty is their share of the revenue generated through your use of their brand operating system and ongoing performance improvement resources, from which you got permission through the grant of the franchise.
So the royalty is the franchisor's share of the customer's money that is spent.
That
okay.
is correct. And so if a person wants to exit their franchise agreement early for whatever reason, good reasons or default, it's perfectly logical to say, you owe me the royalty fees that would have been mine if you had continued to meet your obligations to use our brand operating system and ongoing performance improvement resources for the remaining 4 years of your term, which you've decided not to do. So write us a check.
But that's not common. That doesn't happen.
It doesn't
normally,
happen
right?
because franchisors don't have the guts to do it.
Well, they should look at their cell phone bill every once in a while. That happens to them all the time.
But here's something else that's rather unfair, in my opinion. When a franchisee transfers their agreement to a new person, mm-hmm. that term sheet that I talked about earlier,
right,
has in it goodwill, which is the lion's share of the check that's going to be written to them, correct?
Right.
The franchisor doesn't get any part of that goodwill.
Oh, it should be part of that should be theirs as well.
Well-
Because they, without the brand, they could not have built that goodwill.
You know, I've often made that case, and there's only been one of the 1,250 brands that we've dealt with. There's only been one brand that split the goodwill.
How do you determine the value, the exact dollar amount of that? How do you monetize that? Or
Well, that's always that's why you usually
that's a
get,
negotiation.
you usually get 2 or 3 professionals to assess that do it for a living. But can you imagine how controversial that would be?
No, it's just a nightmare to even think about it.
Franchisors would love it.
Right. Whew. One last question on this in this section. You ready for the last content related question?
Intense.
What does it mean to be a customer driven company?
The first thing it means is being team member driven, because Gallup, this is the 25th year that the Gallup organization has been measuring a great place to work, the 100 best companies to work for. And the statistics are absolutely crystal clear. The studies that have been done, the correlations that have been made are ironclad. The greater the place to work is, and I don't mean an easy place to work, a comfortable place to work. I mean a great place to work where people are trained well, they're respected, they're treated humanely, they're given chances for promotion and opportunity and growth. Where those companies exceed the best, and they're the best companies to work for, the financial metrics of the brand outperform those that aren't customer-centric, and they outperform the Standard & Poor, and they outperform both of the other stock exchanges. So to be customer-driven means this. It means that you are focusing everything you can on creating an experience for the guest that answers the one question we talked about earlier. How do we, as a brand, enhance what we have discovered the customer values?
Right.
That's what being customer-driven means. And in order to enhance what the customer values, we have to make it a great place to work. For instance, just one thing that we look for as a consulting company in our client companies is there a toxic culture? And a toxic culture could be, are women treated differently than men? Are people of one ethnic origin treated differently than people of another origin? Are certain people looked down upon because of their education or lack of it? Those kinds of things. And we look for or do some our managers kept on because they yell at their team members or deride them or bully them? And if you do those sorts of things, you're going to have a toxic culture. And then no matter how accurate you have created the customer experience, it won't be delivered in a way that creates the emotional currency that is delivered when it's delivered by people who have a great place to work. So what we believe is that if you have a great place to work and those team members are well trained and they secondly are executing a process and using technology that create a great customer experience, that great customer experience will create loyal, satisfied, frequent user promoter guests who will drive your profit and growth. So being customer driven means that we make every decision based on the answer to the question, how can we find and capture and retain more of those customers who we know are our customers? How can we keep in mind what they value? And how can we keep creating experiences that enhance what they value?
All of this that you're talking about, everything that we've talked about so far, are things that you help your clients achieve when they contract you. Is that right?
That's correct.
It's pretty impressive. This entire document, we just finished discussing, for all the listeners, we just finished discussing this is just one document that you've produced. And then again, the reason I love it so much is because it just truly and very clearly defines the nature of the relationship, and it can help franchisors nip issues in the bud that if they do not address from day one, year 10 comes around and they've lost control over their franchise, of their entire system, because they didn't clearly define some of these topics. Would you agree with that?
I would. In the 21st century, Kit, what we know is that culture, the way team members feel and the way customers feel, is more important than the product or the service. Because of ISO 9000 and total quality management and zero defect management, because of our ability to create products and services that are of highest quality and defect free, the only competitive advantage we have is in our culture. The way you feel when you buy a cup of coffee at Starbucks is very different than the way you feel when you buy a cup of coffee somewhere else.
It's very funny you say that. I was talking to my daughter about that 2 days ago, and she goes, "You know what? I don't like the coffee at Starbucks as much as I do at this other place, which is just down the street from it. But I always go to Starbucks because of the experience."
Yeah. And personally, I like to go into a Starbucks and announce as loudly as I possibly can that I am here for a Starbucks experience, and that includes the coffee. And there was actually one time where I was in a hotel that had a Starbucks, and I had to announce rather loudly that it was masquerading as a Starbucks.
Because
it was not creating a Starbucks experience.
Is your family just embarrassed to go out to restaurants with you? I know that. I asked that because I know that you like to interrogate the employees of restaurant chains to make sure they understand a few things, or find out if they do, what their role is, etc. What's a typical question you might ask a waitress or wait staff at a restaurant?
Well, my favorite question to ask anybody, whether it's the pilot or whether it's anybody, is, and I would suggest this to your audience, is if you're
both of them.
If you're listening to this and you're a major decision maker or a leader, you consider yourself a leader in your company, and you want to know how well you've done at creating unified thinking, start asking people what they're paid for.
Right, that's the question.
And that's the question. And I have, I've asked in great hotels, for instance, like the Ritz-Carlton or the Four Seasons or some of those, they'll say the following. I mean, I experienced this once in a van driving from the airport to the hotel, and it was the hotel van. I said to the driver, "What are you paid for?" He said 3 things: to make sure you're very satisfied, to make sure that you come back to this hotel or one of our other hotels in this brand, and third, to recommend us to your friends and sphere of influence.
And you just had to wipe the tear from your eye, right? It was so beautiful.
So then I went to the front desk. I checked in at the front desk, and I said, "What are you paid for?" And the person said the same thing. And I needed a shoe shine, and so I sat down in the chair, and he was shining my shoes. I said, "What are you paid for?" And he said, "To make sure you're very satisfied, come back to this hotel." And the point is, that's one thing. Okay, so they had lip service unified thinking.
Right.
But the real thing is do they live it?
Right.
And there are places that do it. And personally, I find outside of Starbucks and the aforementioned airlines in the Middle East that on the whole, hotels do it the best in the United States. They do the best job at creating experiences that make you want to come back.
That's interesting. There's a dry cleaner here in Dallas, and I don't know if it's a chain or not. I don't think it is. I think it's called Bib and Tuckers. But when you take your shirt there, to get dry cleaned, if they notice that there's a button off, they'll check. They check to make sure it has all the buttons, and if it doesn't, they'll sew the button on for you, and you just get your shirt back with a new button. And they had a little note on it that said this button was missing. We put a new one on, and there's no charge for that. It's beautiful.
Well, we in Management 2000 crafted our mission statement at the very beginning of the company, and our mission statement is to give people what they expect and more. It's not clients.
Right.
And so we expect members of our team, no matter where they are, if they're in a grocery store and someone asks them something, we expect them to give that person what they expect and more. So it becomes a way of life when you're part of our company.
That's interesting. That reminds me of a question that I skipped over by accident. On your domestic team here in the United States, you've got Management 2000 is not just Bob Gappa. You've got some pretty strong players behind the scenes. Who else is on your team?
Well, we've got Pam, who over a 10-year period built a franchise company, Carlson Vaughan Travel, from 10 locations to 1,600. And when she resigned from the head of that franchise company, they were doing $3.2 billion. So she's a great resource to our clients. And then we have Andrew Erskine, who is the head of our strategic planning and technology. And that's where we're putting our future in. How do we convey our products and services online and digitally to our clients? We have some other people that we call on, but until we expanded into the Middle East, my role was to maintain Management 2000 as a great lifestyle business for myself, because at a certain point we owned an office building in Houston and had 11 people on staff, but we didn't at that point. But when we expanded to our Dubai office, where we have 6 people, some of whom are Harvard graduates, we've got an attorney, we've got somebody from the London School of Economics, et cetera, et cetera. So now we have a team there, and that has motivated me to do succession planning so that the next generation of Management 2000 people can develop the company to wherever they want to take it. And if they want to ask me my opinion occasionally, I'll give it to them.
I bet they don't have to ask very often.
Well, but I want everybody to know that does not mean that I'm retired.
Right. Absolutely. You may be tired, but you're not retired.
No, and retirement to me will start with death.
You will work to the very end. I truly believe that.
I will. Pam,
all right.
Pam always says that the hotel's going to call and ask her to come get the body. And she'll say, give it to FedEx.
She said, I'm always dreading the call from the hotel. Give it to FedEx. Here's our account number.
But then she'll say, oh, it doesn't have to be here tomorrow. I'll use UPS.
That's right. Oh, that's funny. All right, next set of questions is quick draw round, speed round. These are fast questions and fast answers. And they're not all fast questions, they're not all fast answers, but they're not really franchise topic related, but they're more fun.
Is this where you ask 100 people?
Nope. This is going to ask you, just you. They call them nuggets. nuggets from Bob or Gappa trivia.
All right.
Some of them are franchise related. Some of them are not. So the first one is IFA: join or don't join.
Absolutely join.
Why?
Because it is where your peers exist, the most knowledgeable, experienced people who are using the same business strategy that you are, if you're franchising, are there. And I have never met a group of people who are more willing to share what they know with people than the members of the IFA.
Fantastic. What's the most important publication, website, or resource for a new franchisor?
Their own.
Their own resources?
Their own website.
Fair enough.
Their own website.
Make sure it's done right.
And, well,
I understand that.
The websites today need to be emotional. And particularly, we have to understand, and this may be simple for some to understand, it may be more challenging for others. In today's world, we have to look at what people are buying, not what we're selling.
Right.
Because there's often a Grand Canyon of difference between what I'm buying and what you're selling. I may be buying comfort, and you may be selling food.
Right.
And so it's important to, we've done a lot of research on what emotions make people want to buy. And once you look at this research, you will absolutely understand why the large brands like McDonald's, and by the way, if you want a shocking statistic that most people don't know, McDonald's spends $3.2 million a day on marketing.
That's a lot of money.
So you want to get it right. And as an advertising agency, that 15% a day would be pretty nice.
Can you imagine?
But I'll share the top three emotions with your listeners.
All right.
These are the top three emotions that make people want to buy. Number one is happiness.
Okay, I understand that.
Number two is belonging.
Okay.
And number three is comfortable. Now, when you know that, and you think of Starbucks and you think of Howard Schultz, who is a marketer, Howard Schultz believes correctly that the operating system should no longer be called an operating system, because that name applied to factories when it produced something like a cup of coffee. But today, the operating system is really part of marketing, because it creates perceptions, not a product. And so when you think of Starbucks, you think that before you go, while you're there, and afterward, you're thinking, I'm happy when I go there. I feel like I belong when I go there, because they go, Bob, you want the regular? I feel comfortable, like I belong, and I feel happy, before, during, and after. So what Howard Schultz understands is that people will pay an outrageous amount of money for burnt coffee served in a pleasant experience.
Now, is that sort of like, I hear this a lot, and when people say, well, we are a sales company. Really, we're not a hamburger company. We're a sales company that happens to make hamburgers. Or that's a bad example, but that'd be like saying we are a customer experience company that happens to make coffee. And
everyone is the first part of that sentence. Everyone is in the business of creating customer experiences. So, Kit, the way we talk about that is this way. The business you're in and the industry you're in are different. If you're the business you're in is the customer service experience. The industry you're in is the cup of coffee.
Got it.
And so those are the top three emotions. And then when you understand that, you start knowing why Coca-Cola says you open a can of happiness.
Right.
And you'll hear those words woven into these mega brands advertising. Belonging, comfortable, and happy. For the other 7 emotions, there are actually 23. They would just simply have to get in touch with me if they're...
Absolutely. Have them call you for that one.
But here's the point.
All right.
When you do a customer experience journey map, which is really a journey map is where we're going to stop and what points of interest we're going to go on our journey we're going to go past. And when you create a customer journey map, for instance, from the website to the parking lot to whatever, and what you want to do is say, which emotion do I want the customer to experience at this stop? In other words, when they approach the parking lot, you want the emotion safety and you want the emotion clean. When you go to the front door, the reason we keep that smudge free is because it gives people a sense that it's a clean place and that they're going to do a good job in the back preparing my meal if they did a good job making the door clean. And on like that. So when you write an operations manual, what you're doing is creating an opportunity to evoke emotions.
Customer, which
is the customer experience.
Which results in the customer experience,
right? Duplicating
that customer experience.
So we're all in the same business, as Drucker would say, to create and retain very satisfied guests, but our industries are different.
Got it. I understand now completely. What's your favorite book of all times?
Managing for Results.
Managing for Results. And what about your favorite movie?
Blazing Saddles.
Wait, give me a quote. Give me your favorite quote.
Who's going to go back for a dime?
The FranMan Thruway. Now what'll that asshole think of next? Has anybody got a dime? I don't know. Somebody's got to go back and get a shitload of dimes.
Okay, here's another one that requires a little bit of thought. If you had $1 billion and you couldn't spend it on yourself, you could only spend it in a way that would make the world a better place, how would you spend it?
In developing nations, creating small micro businesses for people. For instance, if I had $1 billion, you could give 1,000 people every year $10,000, and they could do whatever they want with it. They could squander it, or they could go into business. And the reason I would do that is I've read a couple of studies recently where between 80 and 85% of the people who were given that amount of money invested it in opportunities where they could make more money with it.
Right.
And so that is incredibly positive. So I think what I would do is social philanthropy.
Interesting. Good answer. I guess there's not a bad answer, but that's a great answer. When you think of the word successful, who or what comes to mind? It doesn't have to be a who. It could be a what.
Yeah. I think success is one of the lines from a B.B. King song. I'd love to live the song that I sing about.
Well, I mean, success is not the same.
No.
Defining success is different for everybody. It could be a healthy family. It could be a lot of money in the bank. But who is it that comes to mind?
Well, that's what I'm saying. To me, anybody who gets to live the song they sing about.
Got it.
To me,
I love that answer.
To me, when you're able to do that, you're successful.
I love that answer. With only a single short sentence answer, what's the single biggest mistake that you see new franchisors make repeatedly?
We did a survey on that.
Interesting.
A few years ago. We asked presidents and CEOs, if they could change one thing that they wish they hadn't done, what would they do? And the number one thing was, I wish I hadn't let people believe they owned the franchise.
What historical figure do you most associate with? Yourself. Do you most associate yourself with?
I think Churchill.
Because?
Because it's true that the only thing to fear is fear itself.
Okay, good. Good answer. If you could send a message to the world like on a single Super Bowl ad, what would you say?
I think it'd be kind and be helpful.
Good. Good. I was expecting Management 2000, 1-800.
I'll leave that up to you.
I'm just kidding. Yes, we'll do that for you. Last question here. If I told you that I had a time machine, I was going to go back in time to meet the 20-year-old Bob Gappa, and that I would be happy to deliver a message for you, what message do you want to send your 20-year-old self?
That's really, really a simple answer. I'll put it this way. I was about 40 years old until I discovered that Equity wasn't a rock group. And, recently Pam discovered an investment that she had made of $250 30 years ago, and it was now $9,000.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And so what I would do with 20-year-old Bob Gappa, I would say simply this: put 5% of what you earn every year away in an interest-bearing account.
Invest. Because
if $250 can turn into $9,000 in 30 years, $10,000
sure
would have turned into a lot more.
Compounded interest. That's the message.
I've said to Andy, our 26-year-old, when he was 16, I gave him the gift of compound interest. I told him.
How's that?
The gift is, I built a wealth building spreadsheet for him. And I sat down with him, which was very boring for him.
Sure. And
said, if you put $1,000 away right now when you're 16 and assume it's only going to make 3% interest, what would it be worth? And his eyes got very big and then very bored again. But that's what I would do. I would say to the 20-year-old Bob Gappa.
That's a beautiful message.
Just invest.
Ladies and gentlemen, that music means that this episode of the Franchise Manual, brought to you by FranMan, is at an end. Bob, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me and answer all these questions. I just know that this podcast will help both new and existing franchisors to better define that nature of the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee. Yeah. So, Bob, tell everyone where they can find you on the web, or how they can contact you.
The website is www.mgmt2000.com, and our 800 number is 800-847-5763, and my cell phone is 281-932-7162.
That's perfect. Thank you, Bob. Kids, remember the words of Longfellow: the heights of great men reached and kept were not obtained by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upward in the night. Think about that. Live by it. I'm Kit Vinson. Until next time.